The automated monitoring station orbiting Kepler Null went offline exactly 4 minutes after receiving an unclassified frequency pulse that did not match any known military, civilian, or distress band, a pulse that repeated with mathematical structure too precise to be accidental and too old to be modern. And when the backup relay forwarded the signal to Earth's Deep Space Communications Array, it arrived with a priority flag. The system wasn't even programmed to assign at the center of the ISS Valiant, Earth's diplomatic command vessel stationed. Near the Concorde border, Commander Riva Zhao stood in full uniform before her strategic panel, not because she expected combat, but because there were patterns in the signal's harmonic structure that reminded her of something she couldn't quite name. And Zhao was the kind of officer who didn't ignore patterns just because they felt impossible. Her background was in applied military logic. Her specialty was adaptive conflict analysis, and her reputation, especially among other Concorde officers, was that of a cold-minded strategist who never acted out of sentiment but never backed down from uncertain threats. Lieutenant Commander Eli Thorne, her chief science officer and a linguistics A architect with a doctorate in cognitive interface systems, studied the signal through a multi-layered semantic lens, identifying recursive structures that mimicked human-developed linguistic logic. And while he rarely raised his voice or offered conclusions without full correlation, this time his voice held something colder than urgency when he stated that the signal was not just responding to human data. It was mirroring a Zhao-authorized deep scan protocol against Concorde recommendation, knowing full well the political weight of that order. But it wasn't politics that shaped her decision. It was the realization that the signal's pulse was locked to the biological resonance of human cortical response patterns, which meant the structure out there, now called the Black Ship by both Earth and Concorde scientists, had not simply appeared by accident, but was calling to one species specifically. And if humanity didn't answer first, someone else might decide. What the message meant before they did. Major Cal Spence, commanding officer of Earth's Covert Approach Team aboard the infiltration corvette Sparrowhawk, received his orders with clinical efficiency, reviewing deck logs and biometric hazard forecasts without emotion, as expected from a man who had been pulled from silent operations in contested systems and trained to evaluate threat architecture without bias. Spence wasn't diplomatic, but he followed Zhao because her orders never wasted time and never relied on hope. As the Sparrowhawk approached the Black Ship under full stealth, its outer hull came into view, a seamless surface of dark reflective alloy that absorbed not just light but active scans, forming shapes that shifted slightly with proximity, making the ship appear more like a constructed thought than a physical structure. And as Spence's team prepared to enter through a jagged breach near the dorsal ridge, the interior suddenly began changing, adapting, forming walls and air composition compatible with human physiology. A reaction too fast and too accurate to be anything but deliberate recognition. Spence stepped into the central corridor first, weapons inactive but ready, recording a chamber that pulsed with dim light patterns reflecting the team's own heart rates. And as they advanced, biometric telemetry confirmed what no one wanted to admit. The ship was learning from them in real time, adapting its architecture, tuning its gravity and pressure settings, and modifying surface textures to prevent psychological stress, as if it was not only familiar with human limits, but invested in maintaining them. Back aboard the Valiant, Zhao received Spence's preliminary scan feed, showing a central data column unfolding inside the ship like a mechanical bloom, its petals etched with unknown glyphs that began aligning with ancient Terran scripts stored in outdated academic archives. And when Thorne saw the encryption logic embedded in the data stream, his first thought was that someone, somewhere, had predicted the rise of human syntax before humanity ever discovered it. Then the ship responded in the middle of the corridor. The glyphs shifted into a language only the ship and Spence's translator, AI could interpret fast enough, and a message appeared on the visual relay with no attached signal, no atmospheric vibration, and no request for acknowledgement. Just one sentence. Simple and undeniable. Species match confirmed designation. Successors. The moment the black ship identified humanity as successors, the political fault lines that had kept the Concorde from collapsing for over 3 centuries began to split, not in rage, not in open declaration, but in cautious, deliberate maneuvering that suggested the older empires had always prepared for a moment like this, a moment when something ancient would choose a younger species over those who believed they had already proven themselves worthy inside the central hall of the Trine Accord, the largest neutral diplomatic station in Concorde space. Commander Zhao stood beside Earth's lead diplomat, Minister Yalin Reese, a man known less for compromise and more for his brutal precision in negotiation. Reese had been selected not because Earth needed representation, but because Earth needed control over how its message was heard, and Reese had built his entire reputation on silencing stronger voices with irrefutable logic. Concorde Assembly gathered under emergency terms. 17 species seated in rising tiers of voice-coded translation panels and dynamic perception filters, some biological, some synthetic, all watching Earth's delegation not with curiosity, but with wary resentment, because the black ship had not answered to the Concorde, nor acknowledged their ancient claim over the Kepler expanse. And the notion that it had instead aligned with a species barely 2 centuries into interstellar presence threatened the very structure of galactic diplomacy, the Shy Car, crystalline life forms, whose voices carried in harmonic chimes that resonated beyond human hearing, initiated the first formal accusation, stating with cold certainty that humanity had violated non-engagement protocols by physically entering an unclaimed anomaly before any joint assessment team could be deployed. And Reese responded not with apology, but by reminding the chamber that the anomaly had only responded once human frequencies were introduced, and that no other species had even recognized the call. Zhao observed from her place in the shadows of the chamber, saying nothing, but studying the reaction of each delegation as Reese dismantled their moral posturing, because beneath the political phrasing and veiled accusations, there was something far simpler driving their discomfort. They were no longer certain they were the ones meant to lead. Then came the Marathi response, a species older than nearly all others present, known for their reluctance to speak and their vast archive of pre-Concorde artifacts. And their delegates said only one thing, transmitted on a closed diplomatic band that Zhao alone received: "We have seen its kind before. Long ago, we chose not to answer. You chose differently. Now it watches again." And then, within 48 hours, someone acted a Concorde-aligned Marathi patrol group intercepted a Terran diplomatic convoy traveling between Kepler Null and Trine Accord, issuing no warning before discharging a single kinetic strike meant to disable, not destroy, as if daring Earth to respond violently and prove it was not ready for the responsibility the black ship had suggested. But Earth's escort vessel, the ISS Resolute, responded in kind with a precision strike that disabled the Marathi weapon systems without breaching the hull or causing casualties. An action carried out in 13 seconds, flawless and restrained, broadcast to all Concorde systems in real time, followed by a short official message from Zhao's office, translated into every dominant language used by Concorde civilizations. Earth acknowledges the fear behind this strike. We do not answer fear with vengeance. We will remain. The next day, Concorde's long-range navigation network suffered a cascade failure across 3 major trade sectors. No structural damage, no loss of life, just the complete and sudden collapse of faster-than-light transit protocols and systems. Directly tied to the fleets that had supported the attack, diagnostics confirmed what no one wanted to believe. The black ship had intervened without visible movement. disabling the strategic arteries of an empire without firing a single weapon, and in the silence that followed, the black ship sent one message across all known networks, not through standard communication, but as a low-bandwidth subspace pulse that overrode every translation filter in existence. Evaluation continues. Interference acknowledged. Systems preserved. Retaliation unnecessary. Observation persists. The Concorde did not respond. They regrouped, and Earth, having refused to escalate, remained exactly where the black ship had left it, unchallenged, intact, and still under evaluation. For 72 hours, the black ship went dark, no signals, no movement, no further changes to its structure, and while the Concorde interpreted this as uncertainty or dormant threat, Earth's Strategic Council suspected something more deliberate, something tied not to fear, but to measurement within the ISS Valiant. Commander Zhao convened a closed operations briefing, attended only by high-level diplomatic officers, AI architects, and Major Cal Spence, freshly returned from the infiltration mission, with his biometric data scrubbed and resequenced to prevent cross-contamination from the ship's internal readings DR. Marin Valek, the lead neural code analyst from Earth's Cognitive Systems Division, stood before the central projection ring, surrounded by shifting holograms of linguistic lattice and cognitive translation layers. And as she spoke, her voice carried the clipped certainty of someone who had verified the impossible through repeated failure. The black ship is not transmitting, it's listening. It's using every signal we send, every reaction we show, every adjustment we make in protocol as input for a higher-order evaluation system. It is not trying to understand us. It is deciding whether or not we understand ourselves. Her findings were confirmed by PRISM, the adaptive AI framework Earth had designed for deep cognition modeling, which had now been assigned not to decipher the black ship, but to prepare humanity for what the directive truly required. That preparation began with a message. The chamber aboard the black ship that had first reshaped itself for human biology reopened, now twice the size. Its walls lined with data structures tuned to Earth's quantum linguistic bandwidths. And in the center, a new construct appeared. Not a creature, not a weapon, but a projection formed from refracted energy and stabilized graviton fields it introduced. Itself without ceremony, its voice constructed from layered human dialects and flattened into tonal harmony. I am Echelon 5. I am not the black ship. I am its relay, its recorder, and the executor of its protocols. You have passed the initial phase. You may proceed. Zhao stepped forward, the weight of the room shifting with her, and asked the question that had now overtaken every debate across Earth's colonies and allied systems. What does it mean to proceed? Echelon 5's response did not echo, it unfolded. You are not the first species to receive evaluation. You are the first to remain coherent during it. Your weapon systems reflect restraint. Your diplomacy reflects will. Your internal conflict reflects autonomy. The directive does not seek peace, it seeks continuity. The civilization that proves capable of unifying purpose with restraint inherits the directive. Demonstrate cohesion of systems, cognitive, ethical, strategic across all fronts within one stellar cycle. Fail, and the directive retires. There will be no second offer. The weight of that answer silenced even Zhao for a moment. This was not a reward. It was a burden, a mandate written by something older than the Concorde, perhaps older than the entire galactic record, something that had survived collapse by choosing not to preserve itself, but to pass on its purpose when the session ended and the black ship closed its chamber again. Earth knew the conditions were real. They had one cycle to prove their internal system's military command. Diplomatic resolve, scientific coherence could work in unison without regression, conquest, or fracture, and all around them, species who once viewed humanity as irrelevant now began to reevaluate their positions, not because Earth had grown stronger, But because Earth had been asked to leave a legacy, no one else had survived long enough to inherit in the Concord shadow. Fragments of once loyal allies began to move quietly toward Terran-controlled sectors, not to protest or threaten, but to ask what unity would look like if it were designed by a species still learning how to define it for themselves. While Earth moved to fulfill the directive through coalition building and strategic restraint, the Concord fractured in the open, for the first time in recorded history, not through civil war, but through deliberate abandonment of its core principles. As key factions withdrew from the High Assembly, refusing to be judged by a standard they had not set and a ship they had not controlled, the She-Car announced their departure with a broadcast devoid of emotion, citing irreversible bias in the black, ship's judgment and warning that alignment with humanity represented a convergence with instability, masked as progress, but beneath their layered justification was one simple truth: they would not accept humanity as the future of interstellar order, as other species echoed their dissent, not in words, but in fleet maneuvers, communication shifts, and the sudden silence of once open diplomatic networks. Earth's Strategic Council responded with neither escalation nor retreat. They activated Continuance Framework Alpha, a diplomatic blueprint drafted by Zhao's policy team and quietly endorsed by 14 minor systems seeking refuge from Concord collapse. It proposed a new kind of structure, modular, adaptive, and grounded in transparent governance, where cultural sovereignty was protected and technological parity enforced. A system built not to replace Concord, but to survive its inevitable fall. The proposal sent ripples through neutral zones and border colonies, where suppressed species had lived under outdated Concord mandates, and it was there, on those fractured outer systems, that Earth gained its first real allies, not through conquest, but through invitation. But while Earth assembled words, others prepared weapons at the edge of Kepler Null. A loose formation of Concord military remnants, including 2 Dreven war groups and a repurposed She-Car siege carrier, began clustering near the Dusk Point Relay, navigational junction that controlled access to Earth's deep space supply corridors, and whose control nodes were known to only a few to be vulnerable during reconfiguration sequences. What they planned was not conquest, it was collapse. The objective was to strike Earth's support infrastructure, force a retreat, provoke fear, and break the appearance of unity that the Black Ship had begun to recognize. And Earth knew Zhao had PRISM rerouted through the relay's grid. And when the strike came, it did not meet force, it met foresight. The Dreven kinetic projectiles were intercepted not by shields, but by layered feedback pulses that dissolved their structural cohesion mid-flight, disabling their impact capability without triggering kinetic reactions. The She-Car vessels. Command AI was rechanneled into a recursive ethics loop that forced the commander to manually override every engagement order, line by line, in full view of the crew, who refused to proceed without clarity. And when the enemy fleet, caught between protocol and paralysis, halted their assault, they were met not with retaliation, but with a single relay-wide transmission. Encoded in neutral linguistic base, you may continue, but your descendants will remember that you did. None of them fired again. Instead, the attacking ships powered down their offensive systems and requested political asylum under Earth's Continuance Accord, offering their navigational logs, fleet movement records, and proof of external orders, issued by Concord loyalist holdouts still embedded in fringe territories. Zhao, receiving the report in real time aboard the Valiant, gave no order to strike. She didn't need to. The Black Ship illuminated moments later, section by section, in a pattern that mirrored no known language, yet carried the clarity of finality. Its message, pulsing through every diplomatic, civilian, and military channel within 3 light years, arrived not with noise, but certainty. Irregular protocol fulfillment confirmed. Directive transfer ready. It was not victory. It was the moment the galaxy realized Earth had become the axis of something it neither invented nor asked for, but had nonetheless earned the right to carry forward. The directive transfer wasn't a ceremony, and it wasn't a handoff, it was a shift, a movement in the balance of power so vast that it did not erupt across battlefields or echo through parliaments, but instead settled into every system silently, as though the galaxy had simply accepted that something old had ended, and something untested had begun. The black ship's final activation sequence began with a projection, not into space, but directly into neural space, received simultaneously by every sentient mind within its communication threshold. Terran, Drevan, Murati, Shaikar, even species that lacked traditional linguistic cognition, still perceived the same shape, a star map, impossibly vast, woven, with roots that led far beyond known space and into sealed corridors of ancient civilization collapse. These weren't conquest paths or invasion lanes. They were vault sites, information caches, generation-seeded megastructures left behind by the Directive's creators, each one encoded with knowledge, ethics systems, quantum history strands, and instructions for stewardship rather than dominion. The message was clear. Without being direct, humanity had not been crowned. It had been chosen to continue a burden others had failed to carry, to preserve continuity in a galaxy where every empire eventually corrupted itself or fell to stagnation. Commander Zhao declined the offers of political office, choosing instead to lead the first exploratory assembly to one of the oldest vault sites deep in the Quarian Drift, where no Concord ship had dared travel due to collapse fields that bent space around dead systems and buried intelligence. She saw her role not as ruler, but as guardian, someone tasked not with enforcing Earth's will, but with ensuring that whatever came next did not forget what came before. Eli Thorne accepted an appointment to lead the Cognitive Systems Initiative alongside PRISM, focusing on refining Earth's diplomatic architecture through adaptive linguistic resonance and creating protocols to ensure every species had equal epistemic representation within the newly formed Continuance Pact. Major Cal Spence vanished shortly after the final directive acknowledgement, listed as inactive by Earth's Strategic Command, though anonymous reports from deep void colonies hinted at a shadow mission involving counter-protocol containment at unknown vault sites and unspoken acknowledgement that not all knowledge buried in the Directive's legacy was meant to be shared. The Continuance Pact itself took form without fanfare. No capitals, no flags, no anthem, just a single platform of mutual access and distributed stewardship, with each species contributing to the maintenance, activation, or silence of recovered structures. The Concord did not officially dissolve, but it became irrelevant. Its remaining factions quietly either joined the pact or retreated into isolated autonomy, unwilling to stand in the way, but equally unwilling to admit their time had passed. The black ship, now dormant in orbit above Kepler Null, no longer responded to signals. Its surface dimmed to star-reflective matte, as though it had fallen asleep again, confident in what it had left behind, but deep beyond the edges of the known, in a system whose coordinates were hidden even from the Directive's own archives. Another black ship began to stir. Its activation sequence mirrored the first, though slower, more cautious, as though it sensed the outcome of the last evaluation and was waiting to see whether the successors had not only inherited the future, but had learned how to survive it. And humanity, for all its flaws and contradictions, had shown what no empire before it ever had, not that it could control the galaxy, but that it was still humble enough to listen to it first.